We have a massive Winnipeg Jets trade update as a new team has emerged as a trade partner for the Jets, linking them to a former All-Star and a player that could help bolster the forward group heading into this year's Stanley Cup playoffs run. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Hattrick HQ and Winnipeg Jets Digest. But before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 72% of you and 91% of you over on Jets Digest are not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening in the NHL and with the Winnipeg Jets, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, Mark, we have an interesting trade update revolving around the Winnipeg Jets, and it's with Brock Boeser from the Vancouver Canucks, which is a very interesting trade target for not only the Jets, but the Vancouver Canucks, because he's been rumored to be moving on from Vancouver for quite a while. So what do you think about Brock Boeser possibly, before we get into the stats and all that, moving out of Vancouver, first of all, and having a potential trade partner in the Winnipeg Jets?
Well, I mean, looking at Brock, it seems really weird where we've seen Jim Rutherford come out and say, hey, we're not sure if this core can win. We've seen them talk about the extension, the possibility of letting him go. They don't want him to walk for nothing. We've seen that happen to the Canucks with Zadorov and Lindholm last year. They got him for the run. They lost him for nothing. They've made it pretty clear they don't want to lose their own assets for nothing in free agency. So if Brock's not a part of this future, it's going to happen where they're going to move on from him, trade him. Getting something back is going to be interesting. I'm not sure what exactly they're looking for yet. We'll dive into what the reports are showing. But Brock is a huge piece if the Jets can pick him up. This is the top team in the NHL in the Winnipeg Jets. We're seeing them make a push, getting a former 40-goal scorer from last season, a former All-Star, a guy that can go out, score you goals, set people up, not being the best defensively, but still making up for it on the offensive end. I think this would be a major win for the Winnipeg Jets, especially if they're going on a deep run. We've seen Brock perform. I think he was almost or at a point per game in the playoffs last year before going down with an injury. But I think this would be the last piece the Jets need to really become a contender and make that full push.
Well, we know that they need another defenseman, and we know that they need another forward. And we think it's a center, but they could get funky with some stuff here heading into the trade deadline. So, as you can see here from Jim Parsons, he describes that, the Jets could be in on Brock Boeser. There could be some interest there, and he goes on to say that it makes a load of sense to me that the Jets would be interested in Boeser, whether on the trade market right now or as an unrestricted free agent. And I think that's the other interesting thing. If it doesn't happen at the trade deadline, which I think the Canucks, like you alluded to, want it to happen that way, if it doesn't happen that way, I think that he's heading to the Central one way or another. It could be the Jets. It could be the Minnesota Wild, which, he's from Minnesota. It's been linked for how many years at this point? Can't even remember. I mean, it's been forever, it seems, that's been the link. So, he said that it does make a lot of sense. And this is from Murat Eights, actually, that he said. And I don't view his no trade list as a concern either, given my understanding of Boeser's relationships with Jets management. So great relationship there. He obviously wouldn't mind coming to Minnesota. Winnipeg's not that far away, so I could see him being open to that as well. The weather's the same, right? So obviously a lot of players don't like that. But if you take a look at his contract, it's a $6.6 million cap hit, again, expiring this year. This is something that the Jets, first of all, can take on, especially if there's retained salary involved, which I think would have to happen. But Mark, what do you think a deal maybe looks like for Brock Boeser? We'll get into what he brings to the Winnipeg Jets in a second, but what do you think a deal for him looks like? Is there retained salary? Is it draft picks? What are the Canucks in need of right now?
I mean, looking at this, we've seen them kind of fill out their defense. They pick up Marcus Pettersson. They got Victor Mancini from the New York Rangers when they moved on from JT Miller. It seems like management's really dead set on getting a high impact forward in their mid to low 20s that can go in, grow with this core, which is funny because we've seen this from Brock Boeser. It seems like that kind of fills it out. But I think they want to get someone on a cheaper deal. This Canucks team has almost 18 million going into trade deadline. They're actively making moves. I mean, Carson Soucy's on the trade block, so if he wants to be included in this trade too, maybe you get a 2-for-1 coming to the Jets. But looking at this, the first thing I will say, they're looking for a high impact forward. Maybe someone like Cole Perfetti, and I know this is probably an untouchable for a lot of Jets fans, but I think that's what management might be looking for, a guy that's breaking into the league on a cheaper deal that can grow with this core. I'm not sure how much they're sold on more draft capital. I know they don't want to move on from their first round pick. So maybe they want to go get another first to include in a trade. We've seen that happen with the Marcus Pettersson trade. Brock is going to be a high impact forward. The biggest thing with this is looking into the future if the Jets do trade for him. The reports have came out that he's looking for a long-term deal, maybe 6 to 7 years, at around 8 to 8.5 million. Throwing it back to you real fast, Darius, do you think this is something that if the Jets acquired him, it would just be a pure rental? Or would you be comfortable maybe moving on from a young guy, getting Brock, and extending him?
I mean, listen, he's only 27. So I think Winnipeg Jets fans could look at this and be like, you know what? If he extends for 7 years, that's not that bad. You're getting services of an older player. You know exactly what you have in him. And he's put together, if you look at his stats over the last couple seasons, some pretty good seasons, and he can score you some goals, right? Which is something that the Jets need throughout the lineup. They can't just rely on one line or maybe the power play, stuff like that. They need a little bit more goal scoring, support, and obviously need a defenseman. I think that was a great point there with Susie too. You never know. That could be a package deal. A lot of teams are looking for those these days instead of going to different teams because the prices are so high. But again, he can put up some decent points for you. And you brought up Perfetti. I mean, I think a lot of Jets fans, and it's honestly he's 50-50 this year. He missed a bit of training camp. There was a lot going on in the summer with his contract, so that might have something to do with it. He's been up and down at times this season. I feel like he's a great young player that could fit the bill for a trade like this. So I feel like some Jets fans would be okay with that because you would add that right shot on the right side, on the second line, maybe even the first line, although the first line's playing great right now. Wouldn't really touch that. But moving into the future, right, maybe you want a guy who's a little bit older that can have that impact right now. And Perfetti fits the bill perfectly, like you said, going the other way. So that would be interesting. Again, I think there's going to be draft picks involved. There probably would have to be some salary retention. We'll see what happens with that, which would be easy for the Canucks because obviously the contract expires this year. But in terms of the player himself, Mark, I mean, what can you tell Winnipeg Jets fans to expect from a player like this if they were to trade from him? Because again, the Jets and Jets fans are looking at a center right now because a lot of people are not convinced their center depth is that great. Lowry is out right now, but they're not convinced heading into the playoffs it's the best thing. So they've been looking at centers. But if they can add another scoring threat, I think that really helps them going into the playoffs because they have the goaltending. The defense is good. They could add another piece. But if they can add a little bit more scoring, that would be ideal.
I mean, looking at him, I'll get out of the way. He has dealt with some injuries throughout his career. But the biggest thing with Brock is if you want a playoff performer, you have to look no further. Brock is a guy went into the playoffs last year scoring 40 goals. Once he got into the playoffs, we seen him put this team on his back as a goal scorer. In the first round versus the Nashville Predators, they were down. They went into the game and Brock scored a hat trick to win the game for the Canucks. He is a huge part of this team. He was a huge part of scoring goals. He's not going to be the best defensive player, but I think the Jets have defensive talent around him to make up for it. Brock is a playoff performer. He's a guy that's going to perform not only in the playoffs either, but regular season to get you a higher seed in the standings. I am kind of sad from the Canucks side if they do move on from him. But as a Jets fan, if you do get him, if you have to move out a young piece like Cole Perfetti to get him, don't be upset because you're not going to be sad about getting Brock Boeser on this roster.
And I think when you look at Brock Boeser, again, like I mentioned, 27 years old. It's not like you're trading Cole Perfetti for a 34-year-old, right? You're going to have Brock Boeser if you can re-sign him, which it looks like it could be likely because there's a few teams he wouldn't mind going to, including the Jets and the Wild, right, in free agency or via trade. You can re-sign him to a contract and have his services for years to come, right? And like you said last year, absolutely brilliant in the playoffs, right? 7 goals, 5 assists for 12 points in 12 playoff games after they were eliminated in the second round. So could be very interesting, an interesting fit for the Winnipeg Jets, but we want to hear what you have to say. Where does he fit into the Jets lineup for you? Would you be okay with moving on from a guy like Cole Perfetti, because it looks like that would probably be the piece that the Canucks would be targeting in a trade and a return for Brock Boeser? But we want to hear what you have to say in the comments about a potential Brock Boeser to the Winnipeg Jets trade. And if you haven't yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything in the NHL and the Winnipeg Jets.